Amen.
All right, thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum assalam.
All right. Alhamdulillah, I appreciate that comment. Another opportunity, if anyone wants to take advantage of that, I'll tell you what we're about to, what we got. I've sort of just, not sort of, I've actually decided, unless something changes in the next few seconds. I'm gonna spend some time. I talked about, I kind of digressed when I started talking about the Arabic and how Arabic was actually created by Allah for the purpose of being the receptacle for the Qur'an. I'm going to go into that, inshallah. So those people who, they're loving Arabic, they're wanting to understand Arabic, deepen their understanding of Arabic, and they're studying the grammar and the like. This is a critical piece that will enrich even your motivation. You already have some motivation, but when you understand that what you're actually studying is what God Himself produced in the life of a people for the express purpose of being the place where He, God, His intention, His will, His concrete, actual, literal will is actually in the words on the page of the Quran. I just don't know another way of expressing and making that as emphatic as we need to understand it. But you don't walk slow in trying to get that, because that the power that's in understanding the Quran, and God says He revealed the Quran in Arabic. When you go in and we talk about Zamzam water, and we talk about the oil under the ground, that is all on the material side of this life. When you go into the Quran, you're getting the Zamzam and the oil lit from a blessed olive, neither east nor west. It's like, when we say that the Quran is a miracle, we use that language. We use that language, mashallah. That's the closest thing in our English vernacular to get the spirit of the point. The word miracle. It truly is that. And so we're going to be talking about that. So I'm I guess a second or two. Really, time's up. So we gotta go ahead and go to it now. I don't have the material on a PowerPoint type slide, so you're just gonna have to bear with looking at me through all of this process here. But we're gonna go to it. I can't remember. I think it was I know, mashallah, when I came back from Egypt, 2005, for a brief stay over a summer, studying Arabic there. I know a large part of that was when I first formulated the ideas around it. And I believe it was a Mali conference. I want to say 2011. It doesn't have to be, but I'm thinking that it was 2011 when I presented at least part of the paper. Usually, I overproduce, mashallah. It's no boast and it's no apology. It's just an expression of the fact. Sometimes I bring so much. That's one of the reasons why khutbahs can have a tendency to get long. Say, well, I got so much. Let me get all this in here. Can't do it. I'm learning. So let's go with just whatever, as much as we can cover today about this. So to begin with, there are actually two segments that I want to cover today. One segment is the origins of human language and grammar, just understanding the origins of human language and grammar. And then also the role of classical Arabic and how Arabs came into grammar, This is an unpublished paper, other than as much as I've as I've mentioned in the segments that I had the opportunity to present. So, inshallah, to begin with, we're talking about the origin of human language and grammar. So, just understand it from a mechanical, academic perspective. So, I am reading a paper. Speaking of human beings and the formation of human language, Imam Mohammed rahimahullah said, "But God created them human, and God put them in and made it possible for them to be in that area." So now he's talking about the Arabs. He's talking about the Arabs. So God put them in and made it possible for them to be in that area, that geography, that part of the map. God did that, and God created the environment, the natural environment. There are there that affected their physical development, their spiritual development, their human development, their social development, their total development, their language. God did that. God says he's the one who gave you your languages. All right. So here the Imam is speaking about how deliberate, what God's work with a people, and it applies to every people. The focus here right at this moment is for us is the Arabic and the Arabs. You know, the Arabs are a particular type of people, right? A particular group of people that have everything that the Imam just said. They have their geography, they have their place in the map, they have their environment, what is their natural environment, and they have been affected physically, spiritually, and humanly, and socially. Their total development has been affected, including their language, right? And then this is to say that when God put whoever, wherever they are, then in that situation, a part of the product of that placement is the language that comes as a result. All right, so the reference, of course, for the ayah is 30:22. Surah Al-Rum, ayah 22. He is the one who gave you your languages. That's also something very, very important to understand. Noam Chomsky, a famous activist and linguist, Nobel Prize for discovering proving the existence of the pre-existing, therefore the instinctual existence of language in the human being. So when Allah says He gave you your languages, that means He made language a part of your nature, a part of your nature. That's a study in and of itself, but we're not going to go there. So this is what he says to us, Imam Mohammed. He says to us in the Holy Book. I'm continuing to quote the Imam here. He speaks mockingly in the voice of someone who wants to contradict him. He said, "Oh no, man! Oh no, man taught himself the language." Then the Imam replies, "How? Language, the origin of language, is a mystery. It is. It's a mystery how it developed, you know. It must have started like ba, ba, ho, ho. But then the intellect, this is important. If you got you, so the first layout is God puts you where He puts you, and where He puts you has its impact on your language formation. That's the first thing. Then the Imam now is talking about, okay, well, let's look at the causal pathway. Let's look at the developmental path of this thing that we ultimately call language. So he says how. He says, the Imam says how. Language, the origin of language is a mystery. It's a mystery how it developed, you know. It must have started like ba, ba, ho, ho. But then the intellect developed, and man was able to use his intellect. Here's a big point. Pardon me. First, there's the natural environment that a human body, with all of its makeup and its inherent nature, comes into an environment, and the environment and the body interact to begin to, I'm going to call it, force out dynamically this thing that we call language. And so the Imam said it must have started ba ba ho ho, but then the intellect developed and man was able to use his intellect that God made. Imam goes on, the master computer, the human mind that God has made. So now the intellect comes into the picture, something quote unquote independent, not just the body interacting with the environment. Now the human mind comes on. And the Imam goes on. It says he was able to use it and he was able to come up with communication for him and his people in his family or in his environment, a common language. The movie Quest for Fire, I think it's a 2-hour movie with no dialogue. It's like you have fights and stuff like that, but you can see natural human development in that. So the point is that ultimately the lingual instinct, which is what we just said, Noam Chomsky got the Nobel Prize for. The lingual instinct comes online, and there's someone, the leaders of those people, they formulate a mode of communication that they can begin to understand each other. How far back we're going? We're going hundreds of thousands of years back when we talk about this type of beginning. But in any case, the Imam goes on. He says he and his people, he's a communication for him and his people in his family or in his environment, a common language. I'm sure nature played a great role, just nature itself, not the brain so much, but nature itself played a great role in bringing people to form some kind of language for communicating between one another. I got a little itch in my mind that I need to scratch. Just it's not the detail that I want to give, right? But I feel the need to mention it. That when you hear this term, let me see if I can find an easy way, because I don't want to complicate or confuse you. Yes. Okay. Here's the way I was. There's this. You've heard this language before. Social construct. Social construct. Right. I need to blow this up. It's too small. So I'm adding this to this document, and I need to go ahead and do it right, because I'll lose it sometime in the future. You ever had something on your computer, it's there, but you go and you try to search and you cannot find it. So I have to be much more conscious about doing that nowadays. So here's what I write. A useful way of understanding the role of social constructs and mental constructs. See, this has to do with language, right? What the Imam said with regard to the intellect, meaning the leaders of a group of people. This is an early group of people. Those of you note takers, put esoteric in there. And esoteric is a kind of language. Don't think the Freemasons and the Rosicrucians, and I'm not talking about that. Esoteric means that it's a language that is understood by a limited number of people. So it doesn't mean, again, the Illuminati and all that. Don't think about that when I'm saying. I'm talking about if you are a group of people somewhere in deep undiscovered territory on the Amazon River or whatever, it's like their language is an esoteric language because they're the only ones that speak that language. and you would have to be trained and brought into and taught this language. And to the extent that it is only understood by a small number of people, that's esoteric language, right? Exoteric language is like English as it is right now in the world. Exoteric, so almost everywhere in the world you can go, you can find somebody who can speak English. So in terms of language starts out like esoteric, esoteric with everybody. All right. And so as the Imam's is talking about how the intellect, meaning we call them intellectuals, but don't think MIT and Harvard and Princeton when I say the intellectual leaders. It just means those people, those persons who are ahead in their thinking capacity, in their thinking development. Among that group of people, they become the leaders, and they have the responsibility to do what their people need in order to survive, thrive, grow, etc. So that intellect serves that purpose. One of the primary purposes that we're speaking of today is language. Okay, we need a language that we can communicate in so that we can get things done. That's one of the meanings of the Tower of Babel, the Bible story. One of the meanings is that where communication fails, no constructive work is possible. Where communication fails, no constructive work is possible, right? So coming to an agreed upon means of communication is critical for civilization. So Allah has put that lingual instinct in everybody. And then, mashallah, he puts among every group someone who has the intellectual wherewithal to be able to abstract a language or construct a language. Now, here we are at social construct. They're able to construct a language that can serve the purpose of that society. That's a social construct. And again, do not miss this. The Imam said, my mission was a mission of language. So the Imam did exactly what I'm saying to you right now. In the history of anthropology and of people, Imam Mohammed did that for that esoteric group of people that were in 1975 identified with the Nation of Islam. But those people being brought out of one environment into a new environment, they needed a new language if they were going to thrive, survive, and grow. And Allah blessed the Imam to be the mind to construct this transitional, this bridge language, and to open us up to and invite us into a universal language. He was inviting us from the gate into the language of the Qur'an. But he had to, by the grace of Allah, construct a language, social construct, construct a language whereby he could translate. Do you see him standing between two or three worlds? You see him standing between the world of Al-Islam and the Quran proper and the world of the sleepy, mentally dead, so-called American Negro, and the world of the members of the Nation of Islam, and his trying to bring the people who were a part of that out of that, and in his language, bring us out of that into the normal world. And he was successful. This conversation that we're having right now is a product of the success of Imam Mohammed constructing a bridge language that could communicate to those people and those people and those people. You gotta work it out. I know you're not looking at it visually, many of you, I should say. But he had, and this is why somebody, I'm confused. There were some people, mashallah, and obviously, yeah, I would say maybe you were. But you see, let's move on. I'm getting carried away right here. So social construct. So language is a social construct. So wherever you go, you got the French, you got the Spanish, you got the German, you got the English, you got the Arabic. You know, that's different groups have had linguistic leadership that constructed a language for their esoteric group, meaning that it began there so that they can communicate with each other and do the constructive work necessary for their life as a tribe where they are, or as a nation as they evolved where they were. That's the work that has to continue, and that's the work that Allah did with the Arabs. Allah did. Let's keep moving. So a useful way of understanding social construct. Now I'm thinking, do I need to cover all this? Social constructs and mental constructs is through understanding the analogy of words from different languages. They spell and sound differently, even though they're speaking to the same phenomena. I'll run through this quickly. For example, the English word water is spelled as it is, W-A-T-E-R, English. That same word in Arabic and that same word in Chinese and the same word in French, it's not English. So there's an Arabic way of saying water, there's a Chinese way of saying water, there's a French way of saying water. They're all spelled differently, but they are speaking to the same reality. Okay, so the Arabic word for water, Chinese word for water, French word for water, English word for water, they're talking about water. Water is one thing, but you have four different ways that it's being expressed. So the language is a social construct. The word is a social construct. It's something that's constructed for the purpose of identifying something, right? So they're spelled differently, but they are speaking to the same reality. And this applies to ideas, just any idea. We can talk about soul, you can talk about intellect, you can talk about mind. So there are social constructs that you get from the Chinese, from the French, from the Spanish, from the Arab, etc. No one's particular spelling denies the value of the other language's spelling. They're just different spellings in that language for a concept, an idea, or an object. Okay, so that's a marginal type footnote. Just understand that the intellect of the human being construct these languages, and that's why they're called social constructs. They construct these languages for the purpose of serving the people who speak that language to be able to work and interact with each other in a way that is beneficial to their group. Let's get back to the core piece. We're talking about the growth and the movement of language, particularly it's like the origins of human language and grammar. That's what we're speaking about. And so now back to the Imam. The Imam said, I would like to interject here that one example of how nature taught man to develop his own language was through man seeing how animals communicated with each other. I have to give little tips for people who want to further study. The author, the person, really the father of communication, I think they call him that. Let's see. Yes. You want to look up, if you want to understand the science of information, because communication is about information, right? So the person who's noted as the father of that, listen. The victors write the history. So sometimes you get something like, yeah, he's the father. You find out that 1,000 years before somebody else said the same thing. Whatever. But just Claude Shannon. Let's just cover that. Claude Shannon. So if you want to get a deeper level of awareness on the mathematical theory of communication, Claude Shannon is who you're looking for. All right. So let's move on from that. Nature taught man, quoting the Imam, of how nature taught man to develop his own language was through man seeing how animals communicated with each other. At some point, animals were a model and a motivation for early human communication. The Imam himself, creation supported social logic. He's saying find it in nature, and you can find the same thing happening among us as human beings. Continuing the Imam's quote, he goes on to say, but nature itself played a great role in bringing people to form some of the language or communicating between one another. And then, so this is very important, First, nature, that is the environment and what's in my literal physical body, because the environment will hit me with something, and so something through my five senses will communicate to my brain, well, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do this. So this relates to immediate. So when you talk about animal communication versus human communication, animal communication is related directly to what we call immediacy, something that is immediate, meaning there's a felt pain, pain, a fear, a threat, something like that. There are calls, yeah, ooh, 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 the calls and cries that talk about, I found something good, or we're being threatened some kind of way, or here comes a danger, etc. Even like the dog, they call the pointers, right? They'll point in a certain direction. Animals will look in a certain direction where the harm or the danger is coming from. Whatever. So the animal communication is based on immediacy, right? Meaning it's something that is right there in the environment. It's direct, it's concrete. Human communication, when it gets to that level, human communication can speak about things that are not present. The human communication can speak about things that are not concrete. Human communication can communicate ideas, concepts. Human communication can talk about the past. Human communication can talk about the future, right? So human communication can create a medium called language by which it can convey abstract things in concrete ways, all that. Okay. And so that's critical to understand the difference between animal and human communication, right? And for as far as one of the simple ways of understanding the difference between animal communication, because sometimes people might think, yeah, well, they taught the gorilla how to read and this and that. No, this is all immediate, all immediate. And that's all. It's like training a dog to walk on his hind legs, right? It's like, yeah, he can walk on his hind legs, but that ain't natural for him, and that's not walking. So, but moving on, the thing that makes a language. So what the animals are doing, that's not language in the formal sense. It has signs and symbols. Again, with the sounds and the pointing and the behavior, all those are signs and symbols. What's missing is grammar, right? Grammar. And that's the difference between human language and animal language. Not only does you have to have signs and symbols, but you also have to have a grammar that goes with it. And in addition to the idea of addressing something that is not immediate, that is something that is not in the immediate circumstance. But I got to get away from that. So where are we? But nature itself played a great role in bringing people to form some kind of language for communicating between one another. And then the intellect took over. When the intelligence took over, then they started to refine that language. But as they had to face the job of refining their language, they had to use their intellect to study matter, the language in God's creation. The language in God's creation, and then utilized, that is, they took words from God's creation and they built their language up more and more. Not only did they take words and concepts from God's creation, they took the logic, listen, they took the logic, I'm going to say it a third time. They took the logic for those concepts and used them for connecting. You talk about people, dissertations and PhDs, etc. This is just this idea in this paragraph from the Imam. A person following that as the truth and doing the research that affirms this causal pathway, this developmental pathway for human language development. You think you can't get a PhD for that? Trust that. You can. No doubt about it. So the Imam goes on. He says, from the connection of these concepts that they took from God's creation, here it comes, they gave the logic to their language and they call it the grammar of their language. Show you where this these comments come from. They're from a lecture of the Imam, July 13, 1997, entitled The Changing World and the New Importance of Religion. The Changing World and the New Importance of Religion. And it was given at the Northwest Activity Center in Detroit, Michigan. All right. So if you follow, simply put, you said there's a role that nature plays, and nature plays a role up to that point in the pressure. You know, they talk about in development, they talk about selective pressures. So the environment puts pressure on our nature, on our being, that finally tells us, impresses us, say, look, you need to do something about this. And so in turn, the intellect gets turned on to solve the problem that nature brought into our consciousness by the pain, difficulty, and problems that continue to arise. That we got to fix this, so we're done. And so here comes the intellect saying, okay, why don't we go about this way or that way? So the intellect comes up with it. So this is what the Imam is saying with regard to communication. So there's pressure on us to communicate. There's a nature in us to communicate, and we can communicate so far up to a certain point. But then there's a point that arises where we need to be able to communicate on higher levels and higher planes and more abstract levels and more complex ways if we're going to go further in our life as such. And that's when Allah's plan for that nature comes online more so. It's already online, but comes online more so to enact it, to evoke it, to provoke it. And then it dawns in the mind of the one that is intended by God or by Allah's design and in his potential, in her potential, to deliver it to the group that they're a part of. And then the flowering continues. Okay, let's go on. We're still talking about how human language and grammar develops, right? Sorry, I lost my place. Okay, the origins of human language and grammar. We just covered that. Okay, now continuing. We can get a picture of this process by looking at the rising and the setting of the sun. So here's an example of what the Imam is saying. This is me talking. This is not, we finished the Imam's quote. He said, we can get a picture of this process by looking at the rising and setting of the sun, the waxing and the waning of the moon, the changes in the seasons, the birth, growth, and maturity processes of plants, animals, and human beings. All of these follow an ordered pattern, and as such, they shape the perception and thinking of man. That is, these things have shaped the perception and the thinking of man, because for millions, for us, millions of years, we saw that. And then we came to the point where now it's embodied in us. So it's such a beautiful thing. Listen, for the first 5 or 6 years of human life, we're in what you call the hypnagogic state. You see your 3, 4, 5-year-old child, infant. You see them walking around, even talking, et cetera, et cetera. But in the scheme of reality, from a neurological point of view, they're actually sleepwalking. They're actually in what you call a hypnagogic state. You have people say, yeah, I remember when I was 3 years old. Alhamdulillah, may Allah continue to bless you. You're telling the truth, I'm sure. So you're an exception. But most human beings have no real consciousness of what was going on in their life before they're 5 years old, right? 6 is really much closer to the fact. 7 is really the rule of thumb, but I'm going with 5 right now. What was happening? You were just downloading. You just down everything in your environment, but both the natural environment, your social environment is just coming in, nonstop, nonstop, nonstop. Yeah. Okay. So now translate that from the individual of his 5 and 6 years old. Translate that into human history. Human history was in a hypnagogic state for millions of years. This is one of the things that is meant by when Imam Mohammed says the human being was on the earth a long time before Adam was on the earth. Because that long time was a time when human beings were in a hypnagogic state. Nature was speaking to us. Nature was downloading. We were downloading from nature the information out of creation so that it awakens and stimulates and it becomes a part of the reservoir of knowledge inside of us, such that when we become conscious beings, we're just filled with resources for understanding. We call them intuitions sometimes. That it's in us from nature, right? So, all right. So I just want us to understand that that all of this we're talking about, waxing, waning, seasons changing, it's like that was what was embedded in us by nature, established in us, connected in us, macrocosm, microcosm, for millions of years. Let's move on. All of these follow an ordered pattern. There's a pattern in all these things. They follow an ordered pattern such that they shaped the perception and the thinking of man. Man in time and in turn recognized that his life also and his communication must also have an order. Through studying the natural order of creation, and this is elaborated on, Imam Rano Shahid put together these publications. I used to have it right. Whatever. The education of sacred matter. Education of sacred matter. You can go back with this idea. You can go further and see it even more so, inshallah. Through studying the natural order of creation, man came to recognize the ways of peace and stability. Just as through time and experience, man realized that law was and is necessary for a peaceful society, right? Society has to have law. Language has to have grammar. Society has to have law. Language has to have grammar. This is why you can't be considered a civilized society if there's no law in your society. And you can't be considered as having a language if there's no grammar for your communications. Okay? So just as through time and experience, man realized that law was and is necessary for a peaceful society, he also came to recognize that his speech patterns ultimately needed to be governed by laws as well in order to avoid the problems that arose and arise from miscommunication. This, as the Imam was explaining, was all learned and codified. This is what grammar is. Once the problem is recognized, and what we're just speaking of, that problem being recognized, and then you have those who have the instinct, the interest, the capacity to solve the problem of the absence of this order for language. Then they come in and they give it what they call grammar. Look at this. We've seen this happen. Is what we're talking about. We're talking about the Qur'an, right? In the Qur'an itself, the original Qur'an didn't have the dots that we have. So as for us to be able to say babi, boo, tati, tu, noon, ghair, whatever those letters that require dots, those dots are additions. Somebody with the knowledge and of the language, etc., they added dots. And so now those non-speakers of Arabic can know how to read that, and then also the harakat, the vowel markings that are on the u, e, a, and in un additions. Those were additions from people who knew the language and devised a way that was agreed upon to add these things to the writing, right? With the understanding. I mean, how deep did that mind have to be to grasp that? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah didn't reveal a grammar book. He didn't, okay. So when you read this, okay, here's a book to go along with what I reveal, so that you'll be able to add the dots in the right place, so you'll be able to add the markings in the right place, so that it can be understood by others who don't speak your language. Allah blessed us and the world with those who had the lingual instinct to be able to solve the problem that was needed to achieve that. And we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for it. But we need to understand that it was in the intellect of man by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and its presence is a constitution of and proof of Allah's approval. Allah approved it because we still use it, right? Allah approved it, but it was not, quote unquote, revealed in the way that Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq was revealed. I think you understand. And all right, so the dots and the diacritical marks, they were added by intellects on earth who were blessed with the understanding and who had the creative wherewithal to be able to add it, and then Allah gives his stamp of approval for what was done. All right. So where were we? So he also came to recognize that his speech patterns ultimately needed to be governed by law, blah, blah, blah. This, as the Imam was explaining, was all learned and codified by the leaders of those tribes and the nations of every people that have a language. So every people that have a language, somebody did that for them. What happened as I go on, the Qur'an did that for the Arabs of the original area in the peninsula in which the perfection of Islam was established. Okay. Continue to read. So we can see this in the modern standard Arabic that we read and study today. According to Alfred Beetson, his name Beetson, in the article, The Arabic Language Today, quoting him, he said, during the first year in the Islamic calendar, dots above or below letters were systematically used to differentiate between letters which were identical without the dots. Thus, the letters B, T, and TH, speaking of ba, ta, and tha, were marked with one dot below for ba, two dots above for ta, three dots below for tha. And it was not until the early 8th century AD that the use of the diacritical marks, that is the feta, kasra, dhamma, right? It wasn't until the 8th century AD. Do you understand that? It's like 200 years, round figures, after the Prophet. It wasn't until the early 8th century. Well, actually, early 8th century is 7th century. So let's round it off to 100 years, right? That the use of the diacritical marks was introduced to secure the correct reading of the Qur'an. The diacritical system, probably borrowed from the Syriac script, employed short vowels marked by symbols placed above or below the consonant, which they followed in speech. Other symbols placed above the letter marked the absence of the following vowel, and that's the sukun. Sukun was added as well. And others, the ending in the inflections of nouns and moods of verbs. So that's when you begin to talk about the i'rab, the i'rab. And you should hear in the i'rab, you hear Arab in that. So meaning the grammar of the Arabs, i'rab, the syntactical, sometimes it's described analysis. Any case, so the idea is that the endings and the inflections of nouns and moods of verbs, but these marks never came into general use, and to the present day, the system is used mainly in the text of the Qur'an and for teaching purposes. See, this is in the quote. So this is also one of the reasons why there are linguists who say that the Quranic Arabic is a dead language, right? They say that. Why do they say that? Because it's not the general use language in the Arab public. In the Arab public, you go to whatever Arab nation. The Quranic language is not the language that you're hearing on the streets. I know you've heard of Aramia and the like. You won't find that in the marketplace. You won't find that in the restaurant, et cetera, et cetera. It's dialectic, and that was also part of the Tower of Babel scheme of the Shaitan. I'll just put it in large to undermine the Islamic world, because as long as we were communicating in the original Lughat al-Arabiya, the language of the Quran, we were thinking in Quranic language. We were speaking in Quranic language. We were evolving and moving and energizing ourselves in Quranic language. And so when that was undermined, as like the Tower of Babel, that undermined our capacity to do constructive work together. And of course, the rest is history. So much for that. So the dead language issue is to say that the language that's spoken in the marketplace is not of the language of the Quran. All right, that's critical. So there's a distinction between the everyday Arabic and the everyday Arabic that the Arabs speak and the classical Quranic Arabic. So let's go a little bit into that. The role of classical Arabic and how the Arabs came into grammar. That's what we're speaking right now. The role of classical Arabic and how Arabs came into grammar. The distinction of the classical Quranic Arabic from all other human languages is that Allah used the Arab people as the soil out of which a special language was grown. Allah, He did it like a scientist creating a special substance in his laboratory. We know that since 1877, scientists have relied on the petri dish to grow or culture cells in a laboratory for distinct purposes. Similarly, Allah grew the original Arabic language, Lughat al-Arabiya Fusha, right? Allah grew the original Arabic language, or we can even call it the Quranic Arabic language, even though Quran hadn't evolved at that time, but it was being prepared as a receptacle. But let's just keep reading. Allah grew the original Arabic language in the pre-Islamic Arab culture. The original Arabic language was grown specifically to be the vessel for the last revelation of Allah. Nevertheless, I hasten to say, this is me speaking, I hasten to say that this is not a feather in the cap of Arabs in general. In fact, because classical or Quranic Arabic is not the language in use for social communication in Arab countries, scholars of linguistics call classical or Quranic Arabic a dead language. In the Arabic world, dialects of Arabic are spoken, not Quranic Arabic. So Arabs in general can't truly lay claim to the Quranic Arabic language as their language. Their language is the one they use in everyday communication with each other. That's your language. For those who take pride in that, we're not trying to slap in the face anybody that's innocent. This is without even addressing the fact that there's a terribly high illiteracy rate among Arabs around the world. All right. In fact, when we were in Saudi Arabia, I don't know, one of the times, around the 90s sometime, and we were in one of the malls Yeah, they had malls. They had malls there. We wanted them out in escalators, coming up the escalator. And at the top of the escalator, a big sign in Saudi Arabia. It said, "Come, let us learn Arabic." Wait a minute, where am I? So they are recognizing right there in a public service manner and say, yeah, whatever y'all talking, y'all ain't talking Arabic. They're talking Arabic. It wasn't they didn't just put up for us. They're talking about it. So when you add to that, A, you're not talking Arabic, and then B, it's like you're illiterate. Two, man, that's a problem. So let's move on. So inshallah, we will say more on the topic of dialects in a minute. So why did Allah create the classical Arabic language? This is what we're speaking to right now. Why did Allah create the classical Arabic language? Dr. A.R. Fatihi, in his writing, The Communicative Dimension of Quranic Translations. So that's something you can look for. The book, The Communicative Dimensions of Quranic Translations, right? Dr. A.R. Fatihi, Fatihi. He explains something very important that helps us to understand why Allah created a special language for his last revelation. Allah, he didn't even let the human being create a language for his last revelation. He created the language for his last revelation. Allahu Akbar. Dr. Fatihi says this. He says, normally one translates ideas on which the words act as constraints. He means words are like cans and ideas are like the contents in the cans. Quoting the doctor, consequently, he says, it is useful as a warning against taking the Quranic expressions at their face value and against translating from or into the primary meanings of words. What he's pointing out is that the fact that it is the nature of words to act as containers for ideas, meanings, principles, and values. And he's warning against thinking that one has to but translate and interpret the primary meaning or definition of an Arabic word, which is the container, to have properly translated and interpreted the word. So what he said, look, don't think you can just go to a dictionary and say, okay, well, the dictionary says this means this. And then, okay, well, let's translate it with that, right? Can't elaborate. I mean, I could, but don't want to take all the time. But listen, you already know dictionaries of any stripe, they always change. They always change. It's like, edition number 1, 2, 3, 4, 50, whatever. It's like, so a word had this number of definitions on it first, entries for the explanation. And then 5 years later, now you have that many. And then 5 years later, you have that many. And then when you decide what you're going to translate from one word to another word, it's like, which meaning is the correct meaning? That's social construct. Everything we talked about in terms of social. Let me drink some water here. Everything we said regarding social construct applies to all dictionary translations. All dictionary translations, it applies there. That was what was useful at that time for those people at that time to understand this particular sound. We call it a word. It's okay with between 1870 and 1920, this was what it was meaning, and it was useful. But then in 1922, this word was introduced and applied to that in this way. And since that time, it's been used. So don't depend on dictionaries, thinking that you got it when you get to a dictionary. Dictionary is just designed for hints. Let me just continue to read it here, because maybe it comes up. Is that he's warning against thinking that one has to but translate and interpret the primary meaning or definition of an Arabic word to have properly translated the interpreted word. Amplifying this, Imam Mohammed's quote from 12 years ago, which we had just read, the Imam said, the words contain concepts, Let's go slow with this. The Imam said the words contain concepts, and concepts contain a logic. Okay, words, concepts, logic. From Imam Mohammed, right? Words. Okay, you see a word, boom. Okay, well, that word is a container for what? A concept. Okay, and what's in the concept? A logic. There's a word, then the word has a concept, and the concept carries the logic. So the Imam says that words contain concepts, concepts contain a logic, and it is not until you grasp the concept and the logic in the words that you can speak the language. Shout out to my friend and brother, Progressive Chief of Mali Institute, because you maybe there's somebody else that does it as well that I'm just not as familiar with. Alhamdulillah. But that's what the Mali is dedicated to, and producing students that have that wherewithal capacity. May Allah continue to bless them and others. And I'm on the faculty, so I gotta respect. Look, I love everybody that is loving God, mashallah. But the Islamic Learning Institute, I'm a part of that faculty for this semester as well. So shout out to Illy for its work. But let's get back to the subject so we can finish up. So the Imam said that the words contain concepts, the concepts contain a logic, and it is not until you grasp the concept and the logic in the words that you can speak the language. So you're not speaking the language when you just make the sounds and use the dictionary definitions. You still got a ways to go. MashaAllah, we all have a way to go. The concept and the logic in the words that you can speak the language, which ultimately means apply it correctly in the world. This we talked about fiqh in my course with Italy just this past Thursday. In any case, fiqh, it means having insight and the capacity to apply what it is that you've been led to understand. And so that's what's important. And the Qur'an says this formula that goes on, pure, recitation, purification, and revelation. Ya'lu alayhim ayatihi wa yuzakihim wa yu'alimuhum al-kitab. That's the letters. That's the grammar. That's the quote unquote reading. Kitab wal hikmah. That's the application. Abstract the logic for applying it in the world. Now you have the hikmah, inshallah. So why did Allah create the original Arabic language? Because it was his plan to reveal ideas, meanings, principles, values, concepts, and logic hitherto unknown, not just for the Arabs, but for the benefit of all mankind until the end of time. Do you understand that? That the Quran is to serve all mankind to the end of time without a new version. There's no updating. There's no updating the Quran. That's it. El-yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum will never need to be changed. Will never need. You don't need a new version. And it will serve humanity wherever humanity exists until the end of time. That, mashallah, that's what Ajib. Look it up. So why did Allah create the original language? Because he had his plan, and we just explained that. He would reveal ideas, meanings, principles, values, concepts, and logic that would serve man till the end of human history. And as for those in Revelation that state he taught man what he was not before knowing, and in the later revelation, Allah stated that he is teaching you new knowledge. All of this speaks to the intention of Allah and his plan to have a language capable of containing divine ideas, divine meanings, divine principles, divine values, divine concepts, divine logic, divine wisdom. All of this in the language of the Quran. We must also remember that just as the original Arabic language was prepared in anticipation of Allah's plan to reveal new knowledge, Muhammad ibn Abdullah, before he knew it, he was also prepared to be the recipient and the carrier and the exemplar of that last revelation. Alhamdulillah, Allah made him to be the vessel for the last revelation, to be carried vis-a-vis and inside of that language that Allah also cultivated to be a capable receptacle to hold the vast meaning that Allah wants to put in something. Look, just take one word, taqwa. Taqwa, it's a big word. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that word taqwa is in the language, right? What does it contain? What does the word taqwa contain? Do you think it only contains the meaning of fear? Alhamdulillah, Imam Mohammed tells us regardfulness. Yeah, he gives us a useful to it. He never told us that that's the only thing that it means. It's like there's a universe in that word. And just, don't even talk about other words. That word. So we must remember, let's go. So we must remember that just as the original Arabic language was prepared, Muhammad ibn Abdullah, before he knew it, was prepared to be the receptor. And look, here's the other thing. It's like, I know, alhamdulillah, no disrespect, no intent, no, nothing hurtful. We're trying to, but every good and correct thing that's said about Christ is real in Muhammad. Listen to what I'm saying. Every good and correct thing, positive, complimentary, keep it qualified, good and correct thing that's said about Christ is realized in Muhammad. See, that's a whole world of life in the confirmation of that statement. I'll say it again. Every good and correct thing that's said about Christ is realized in Muhammad. That's what we have. So finally, Muhammad ibn Abdullah would become the seal of the prophets and demonstrate how that last revelation was to be lived in the world. Does that sound familiar? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God's. And then the Word took on flesh and dwelt among men. So one of the first things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, early revelation to the prophet, peace be upon him, he says, soon shall we send down to you a weighty word. So Allah used both the language that he developed among the Arabs and a special human being that he developed among the Arabs to be the repositories of the Qur'an and the last revelation to human beings. And so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he modeled that for us. Quran in 62:2, it says, "It is he who sit among you, the unlettered apostle from among themselves, to rehearse to them the signs and to sanctify them and to instruct them in the scripture and the wisdom." And this should give the student greater appreciation for what Allah means when he says, "And follow the light that was sent down with him," in 7:157, because his nature is also a part of the revelation, right? As well as the prophet, his own saying, "And I have been given the Quran and something like it." And so this hadith is understood to reference the prophet's eloquence as well as his character. And the event itself also is a clear fulfillment of this picture in the Bible. And the word was made flesh and dwelt among us. Alhamdulillah, Allah knows best, mashallah. That is our lesson for the day. ACU students, inshallah, you're going to be getting a new address and we'll have a new lesson tomorrow. Those of you who are interested in the Institute, A Clear Understanding Institute, go ahead, aclearunderstanding.org, and we'll follow it, follow that up more. Close out